The first time Yalrex saw a human drink what looked like a thick, reddish-blue liquid from a plastic bottle, he assumed it was poison. Or perhaps fuel. His three eyes blinked in unison as he tried to interpret the label. The human language English still puzzled him, although he had downloaded 2 glossaries and spent over 90 hours studying syntax. Across the cluttered workbench in Habitat Compartment 6B, the human named Branick took another swig and winced. Ugh, that went down weird, Branick muttered, setting the bottle down beside a half-dismantled coolant regulator. Yalrex leaned forward, his narrow neck extending like a periscope. Branick, that fluid. What is its function? Is it caustic? Does it repair organ degradation? Or increase metabolic combustion? Branick coughed into the crook of his arm and gave a tired laugh. No, man. It's just cough syrup. Yalrex straightened. Cough. Syrup? Yeah. My throat's been killing me since yesterday. Probably from the air scrubbers being out of calibration. My lungs aren't used to this recycled mix yet. Yalrex stepped closer, antennae flicking with curiosity. You consumed an unknown chemical compound, not synthesized in this facility, to self-medicate a pulmonary irritation? It's not unknown, Branick replied, rubbing his chest. It's over the counter. I brought it from Earth. It's cherry-flavored. Kind of. Cherry. Never mind that part. Yalrex stared at the bottle. The label read, Max Relief Cough and Throat Soother in bold letters. Ingredients listed compounds Yalrex didn't recognize, except for the ethanol he knew that one. His data bank flagged it as a low-grade intoxicant. He looked back at Branick. You were consuming alcohol? Technically, yes. But it's like trace amounts. It's not going to make me drunk or anything. Yalrex's skin flushed a pale yellow, the Prilaxian equivalent of distress. This is a sanctioned research vessel. Intoxicants are strictly forbidden. If the commander discovers it's medicine, Branick snapped, then softened his tone. Seriously, I wouldn't jeopardize the mission over a cold. I just need to keep the coughing down so I can get through diagnostics. Yalrex's gaze lingered on the bottle. Your species creates medicinal compounds that contain mild poisons? Yeah. Weird, right? Yalrex didn't answer. He turned away, processing the information with a subtle hum. Branick returned to adjusting the coolant regulator, coughing into his sleeve again as he worked. The tick in his throat hadn't improved yet, but the syrup usually took a bit to kick in. 2 hours later, during a systems recalibration in the hydroponics bay, Branick's hands began to tremble. At first, he thought it was fatigue, but then his knees gave out. He caught himself on a pipe railing, groaning. Yalrex, who had been monitoring the nutrient flow sensors, turned sharply. Branick. Branick slid down against the wall, breathing hard. Head spinning. Can't focus. Yalrex rushed over, scanning Branick's vitals with his portable wrist array. Pulse elevated. Oxygen low. Blood temperature up by 3 degrees. You are destabilizing. Branick nodded, eyes half-lidded. Might have taken a bit too much syrup. I didn't measure it exactly. You overdosed on your chemical cherry poison? Not poison. Branick passed out before finishing the sentence. Yalrex immediately alerted medical. Within 8 minutes, 2 Prilaxian medics arrived with a hover stretcher. Branick was unconscious, skin pale, lips slightly blue. One medic scanned the syrup bottle Yalrex had brought from the workshop. This contains dextromethorphan and diphenhydramine, the medic said. These are not in our pharmacological database. Should I report this to Commander Nozdek? Yalrex asked. No, the medic replied. Not until we understand the repercussions. We cannot accuse the human of sabotage if he merely miscalculated a dosage. Branick was taken to the infirmary. Yalrex followed. Hours passed. When Branick finally woke, his throat was dry and his stomach churned. A translucent mask delivered oxygen, while a fluid line pumped saline through his vein. Yalrex stood beside the bed, his posture stiff. You survived, he said. Branick croaked. Barely. Felt like my organs were doing backflips. You consumed a dose of medication inconsistent with your body's tolerance. Why did you not consult the medical database? Because I've been taking this stuff since I was 10. I didn't think twice. You were not 10 in this environment. Branick sighed, then coughed again. Yeah, I get that now. Yalrex leaned closer. What is the function of cherry flavoring? Just makes it taste better. Sort of. Is that why the bottle was half empty? Branick glared. I wasn't chugging it for fun. Yalrex tapped the datapad. I have been compiling a list of Earth remedies that are potentially hazardous in alien environments. Your syrup is now listed as moderate risk. Great. A nurse entered, a slim Harnakian with glistening teal skin. She adjusted Branick's fore and said, "Your blood pressure has stabilized, and your liver shows signs of stress but no permanent damage. You'll remain under observation for 2 planetary cycles." Branick groaned. 2 days. She nodded and left. Yalrex didn't move. "I was not aware your species self-administers untested compounds during illness." "Yeah, well, we do a lot of dumb things when we're sick. It's either that or lie in bed coughing for a week. You chose the method with potential organ failure." Didn't know it had hit me that hard. Yalrex considered this. "Your resilience is impressive, but your recklessness is baffling. Welcome to humanity." Later that night, Branick sat up slowly, wincing as he moved. His muscles ached, and his throat hadn't improved much. Yalrex returned carrying a tray with a ceramic cup. Branick eyed it. "What's this?" "A Prilaxian root broth. It contains no intoxicants, but it may soothe your inflammation." Branick took a sip, then gagged. "It tastes like wet moss mixed with battery acid. It is not cherry-flavored." No kidding. He drank it anyway. By the end of the second day, Branick was stable enough to walk short distances. Yalrex accompanied him to the observation deck, where stars bled streaks of light across the window. Branick leaned against the railing. "I miss Earth sometimes. The gravity, the air, the sanity." "You miss a place where poison is sold in bottles labeled relief?" Branick chuckled. "It's complicated. So is surviving you," Yalrex said. They stood in silence for a while, the hum of the ship a steady background rhythm. Then Yalrex asked, "If you had not consumed the syrup, what would have occurred?" "I'd have coughed through the day, maybe slept badly, but at least I'd have avoided a trip to the med bay." "Then perhaps next time, you will choose the moss battery broth?" Branick glanced at him. "Maybe, if you add some cherry flavor." Yalrex turned, eyes narrowing. "That would defeat the purpose." Branick laughed, the sound hoarse but genuine. Behind them, the stars kept moving. The next cycle began with a tremor. Not from the ship. From Branick's left hand as he tried to reattach a thermal regulator valve in maintenance shaft C12. He pressed his thumb against the panel's grip sensor, but the tremor made it register as incomplete. The system blinked red. Again, Yalrex, crouched beside him with a diagnostic wand, adjusted his posture without looking up. "Is the tremor residual from your self-induced chemical instability?" Branick exhaled through his nose. "I didn't induce anything. It was a misjudgment." "That is a definition of induction." Branick turned away from the panel and flexed his fingers carefully. "It's probably just dehydration. I haven't had much water since yesterday." Yalrex's fingers paused mid-scan. "You are aware that water is free-flowing and accessible from 5 dispensers within this quadrant?" "Yeah, but none of them are near my bunk." Yalrex blinked twice. "Your species truly is governed by proximity thresholds." Branick gave a loose shrug. "When you're tired enough, even the floor looks like a decent option." Yalrex resumed scanning in silence. The diagnostic wand emitted a low chime, and a green light flickered across the display. Thermal loop integrity is within acceptable variance. However, the vibration dampeners are undercompensating by 7%. Branick grunted. "That's why the stabilizers were humming." "I thought it was just in my head." "You did not consider instrumentation error before assuming auditory hallucination?" "I've been hearing weird things since the syrup. I thought maybe my brain was still catching up." Yalrex scanned him sideways. "Your internal systems are not optimized for this environment. Perhaps you should request adaptation supplements. Or more moss broth." Branick leaned back against the vertical ladder rung and rested his head. "That stuff made my tongue go numb." "That is how you know it is working." A klaxon barked twice through the corridor, followed by a soft chime and a voice from the comm grid. Not the commander. It was the ship's environmental technician, a Glenari with a voice like liquefied glass. "Attention, Deck 5 oxygen ratios have reached a deviation threshold. Enclosed crew must report to MedLab for blood gas evaluation." "This is protocol." Yalrex immediately stood. "That includes us." Branick didn't move. "I just got out of the medbay." Yalrex gestured toward the access hatch. "Then you are already conveniently prepared for re-entry." They arrived at MedLab 11 minutes later. The corridor outside was lined with translucent waiting pods, each holding a crew member already connected to diagnostic harnesses. A Deltari nurse motioned Branick toward the 5th station and handed him a nasal adapter. Branick held it up. This thing's too small for my face. It adapts, the nurse said, pressing a button. The adapter unfolded with a faint hiss and widened to fit his nose. Branick attached it and leaned back against the recline panel. Cool air flooded his sinuses, sharper than anything from Earth. Yalrex stood beside the station, arms crossed behind his back. Your circulatory oxygenation levels must be measured. If they're low, you may experience mood irregularities, memory lapses, or sudden aggression. Branick glanced at him. That explains half of my teen years. The diagnostic panel blinked. The screen displayed a moving graph with small notations in 3 different languages. The nurse returned, checked the readout, and frowned. Your hemoglobin saturation is under baseline. You will require a stimulant gas infusion. I'm already breathing gas. This is different. It contains hyperoxygenated microtides. Sounds expensive. It is not, the nurse said. It tastes like fermented kelp. Branick made a face. Of course it does. The infusion mask was attached with a gentle click, and within seconds, Branick felt his chest expand with a clarity he hadn't realized he was missing. The fog in his head lifted. Even the tremor in his fingers eased. Yalrex nodded at the result. Why did you not report your symptoms earlier? I figured I'd adjust on my own. You were demonstrably incorrect. Branick didn't argue. The mask hummed softly as the infusion continued. Across the lab, a blue-skinned technician muttered something about carbon drift in the lower decks. Yalrex moved closer to the observation console and tapped through a series of logs. I have noticed a pattern, he said. Human physiology requires constant balancing acts. You treat your internal chemistry like a negotiation. Branick pulled the mask away long enough to say, yeah, we're kind of like old cars. Gotta keep adjusting the carburetor. I do not know what a carburetor is. Neither do most people who drive. Yalrex blinked once. That explains much. The nurse returned and detached the mask. You may experience a temporary increase in auditory sensitivity. Drink water. Branick slid off the recline panel, his steps steadier. I'll try to find a dispenser not 10 kilometers from my bunk this time. Yalrex walked beside him as they exited. If you had continued ignoring your symptoms, you might have collapsed again. Yeah, I'm starting to see a theme. They turned into a quieter corridor, the lighting softer here, tinted slightly green from the arboreal oxygen recyclers branching overhead. Branick paused beneath one of the larger growth clusters and leaned against the wall. I miss air that doesn't try to outsmart me. Yalrex examined the fronds above them. This air is technically superior. You are simply unaccustomed. Same difference. A small group of Zalari engineers passed them, chittering in their native tongue. One of them glanced at Branick and murmured something that made the others laugh. Yalrex didn't translate. Branick crossed his arms. Let me guess. They think I'm the one who clogged the vent with noodle packaging. No. They think you are the reason the artificial gravity had to be recalibrated last week. Branick blinked. That wasn't me. Yalrex tilted his head. They do not require evidence. Only plausibility. Branick straightened. I'm starting to see how rumors survive in space. You contribute to them by surviving in space. They continued down the corridor until they reached a junction. The left path led to the engineering bay. The right led to the dormitory wing. Branick hesitated. I should probably check the valve array before the next cycle. If that vibration gets worse, we'll be chasing microfractures for weeks. Yalrex nodded. I will accompany you. Your motor stability is not fully restored. Branick raised an eyebrow. You just want to watch me fumble with tools again. I find it instructive. Of course you do. They reached the array chamber 20 minutes later. The door required manual override due to an earlier power surge. Branick pried it open with a crowbar he found taped to the wall. Yalrex watched. Is that standard human procedure? No. It's just faster than waiting for systems to reroute. The panel inside was a mess of overlapping cables and conduit loops, some still marked in Prilaxian. Branick knelt and began untangling the upper sheath. Someone rerouted the coolant bypass without updating the schematic, he muttered. Yalrex stepped closer. That would be Engineer Veltrin. He does not trust digital maps. Why? He believes the ship is reconfiguring itself to confuse him. Branick stared at him. Is it? No, right. He pulled the last connector free and inserted a fresh node. The stabilizers hummed, then fell silent. The vibration vanished. Yalrex tapped the wall lightly. Efficient. Branick stood and stretched his arms. I may not understand fermented kelp gas, but I can read a coolant loop in my sleep. I believe that. They walked back in silence, the corridor lights dimming for the ship's rest phase. As they reached the dormitory wing, Branick paused. Seriously though, he said, thanks for watching out for me. Yalrex didn't respond immediately. Then, it is not difficult. You are unusually observable. Was that a compliment or an insult? Both. Branick laughed, then opened the door to his bunk. The air inside smelled faintly of polymer insulation and something like burnt cinnamon. He stepped in, then turned. Hey, if I keel over again, you're not allowed to say I told you so. I will say nothing. I will simply stare meaningfully. Branick grinned. That's worse. Yalrex walked away without replying. Behind the closed door, Branick sat on his bunk and rubbed his temples. His head still felt like it had a low-frequency buzz, but at least he was upright. He reached for the hydration pack beside his bed and finally drank. It tasted metallic, but it was water, and he was learning. Slowly. The next morning's cycle began with a malfunctioning waste processor and the unmistakable sound of something sloshing backwards through the filtration vents. Branick stood ankle-deep in a shallow pool of gray fluid, holding a mop he had borrowed from a storage alcove no one had used in weeks. His boots squeaked with every step. Yalrex stood 10 feet away, balanced on a retractable service platform, arms tucked behind his back in what Branick had learned was a posture of intense disappointment. You are aware this corridor is not rated for manual fluid containment, Yalrex said, antennae twitching in time with the flickering ceiling lights. Yeah, Branick muttered, wringing out the mop into a dented collection bucket. But if I wait for engineering to show up, it'll be a swamp by midday. You are not qualified to engage with waste systems, Yalrex replied. There are microbial colonies in that sludge with unknown effects on your immune structure. Branick gestured to the mop head. This is a reinforced polymer blend. Same stuff they use in orbital kitchens. I'll live. That is not certain. Branick paused, one hand on his knee, breathing heavier than usual. I've dealt with worse back on Earth. Once had to clean up a ruptured septic tank during a heat wave. That stuff made this look like mineral water. Yalrex tilted his head. Was this part of your formal training? No. It was part of a summer job. Paid enough to buy a second-hand scooter. And this was desirable? I was 16. It had flames painted on the side. Yalrex made a sound from his thoracic cavity that might have been disapproval. Your species appears to equate discomfort with character development. Branick pushed the mop aside and sat against the wall, boots still submerged. We don't always choose it, but we're good at surviving it. A soft chime sounded from the corridor junction as a maintenance drone drifted into view, its lower appendages extended in a V shape. It paused above the spill, scanned the area, then emitted a low warning tone. Branick waved at it. You're late. The drone hovered closer, deployed a siphon tube, and began suctioning the fluid into its internal reservoir. Yalrex stepped down from the platform. Your heart rate has increased. You were sweating more than baseline. It's hot in here, Branick said, wiping his forehead on his sleeve. Ventilation's down, and I've been mopping for over half an hour. Yalrex scanned him with the wrist array. Your electrolyte levels are dropping. You require hydration. I just drank a whole pouch before this. That was over 90 minutes ago. Branick pushed himself upright, knees cracking. Fine. I'll grab another on the way back to the dorms. Yalrex walked beside him as they exited the corridor, the maintenance drone still humming behind them. They passed a pair of Zalari technicians who gave Branick a wide berth, muttering in hushed tones. One of them had a translator badge that flickered with static. Branick glanced at Yalrex. They think I broke the processor, don't they? They believe you flushed incompatible organic matter into the waste loop. I didn't. They do not require proof. Branick sighed and rubbed his temples. I didn't even eat anything weird. Yalrex adjusted the settings on his scanner. Your sodium levels are low. Your body is attempting to compensate, but inefficiently. Maybe I just need to lie down. Or you need salt. Branick stopped walking. What? Salt. Sodium chloride. It is a component your body uses to retain fluid and regulate pressure. You are deficient. I didn't bring a salt stash with me. There is a mineral compound in the nutrition lab that approximates your need. It is used to feed the Terran root fungus samples. It may be repurposed. Branick looked skeptical. You want me to eat plant fertilizer? It is chemically compatible and filtered to meet ingestion standards. That's not comforting. They changed course toward the nutrition lab. The corridors were quieter this time of cycle, with most of the crew either in diagnostics or hibernation pods. When they arrived, the lights inside flickered to full brightness, revealing rows of labeled canisters stacked in cold storage. Yalrex pulled out a small silver tin and placed it on the counter. This contained sodium chloride blended with calcium phosphate. Not ideal, but sufficient for temporary regulation. Branick opened the lid and sniffed. Smells like drywall. Apply it to a food base. There is no food base. Yalrex handed him a nutrient wafer from a supply drawer. It was gray, triangular, and slightly crumbly. Branick stared at it. This is the saddest cracker I've ever seen. It is not intended to provide joy. He sprinkled the mineral powder onto the wafer and took a cautious bite. The texture was like pressed sawdust, and the taste reminded him of a chalkboard. But he chewed it down, then chased it with half a hydration pouch. Yalrex monitored his vitals. Heart rate stabilizing. Sweat glands returning to standard output. Branick leaned against the counter. You know, for all the tech on this ship, we're basically just improvising. That is how your species functions. Branick gave a dry laugh. Yeah, we're good at pretending we know what we're doing until it works. Yalrex sealed the tin and replaced it. It is not pretending. It is iterative problem solving under insufficient data. Is that a compliment? It is an observation. They left the lab and returned to the dormitory wing. Branick peeled off his boots and stepped onto the metal floor, which was pleasantly cool. He sat on the edge of the bunk and rubbed the back of his neck. Feels like I've been running uphill all day. Yalrex stood near the door, posture more relaxed than usual. Your body is adapting. Slowly. Better than not at all. You could accelerate the process with rest and adherence to the acclimation protocol. Branick looked up. You mean the one that's 400 pages long and includes a section on emotional humidity? It is comprehensive. I'll read it when I can keep my eyes open. Yalrex nodded once. Do not mop unsupervised again. Noted. Yalrex left without another word, and the door slid shut with a soft hiss. Branick lay back on the bunk, arms folded beneath his head. The ceiling was blank metal, but his mind traced patterns into it: home, the sky over his childhood house, the flickering light of a backyard bug zapper. He didn't miss the noise, but he missed the simplicity. He closed his eyes. Hours later, the system timer chimed softly, signaling the beginning of the next cycle. Branick stirred, stretched, and felt markedly better. The dizziness had faded, and his limbs no longer felt like they were made of jelly. He got up, dressed, and made his way to the systems deck, where Yalrex was calibrating the resonance dampeners. Branick tapped the panel beside him. I think I'm finally syncing up with this ship. Yalrex didn't look away from the console. You have survived 3 consecutive days without critical failure. I'll take that as progress. The crew has adjusted their probability index for your continued presence. Oh, what's the new ranking? They now believe you will last another week. Branick grinned. That's practically a promotion. Yalrex turned to face him. You have demonstrated a pattern of recovery that exceeds expectations. That's what we do. We break stuff, fix it, and keep going. Yalrex paused. It is inefficient. It's human. They worked in silence for a while, adjusting the dampeners and running tests. When the final calibration passed, the vibration through the deck faded to nothing. Branick exhaled. That's the first time in days it's been quiet in here. Yalrex checked the readings. Optimal levels achieved. No further adjustments required. Branick leaned against the console. Guess that means I've earned a break. Yalrex nodded. Do not consume any unfamiliar substances during it. Branick held up his hands. No promises, but I'll try. They left the systems deck together, the corridor lights pulsing in slow rhythm above them. For once, nothing was broken. Nothing was leaking. No alarms were sounding. It was, briefly, peaceful. And that, for Branick, was enough.